Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, September 12th, 2023. You know what time that means. It is, of course, time for another show. I never tell you what time it is when I come on. I only say it's time for another show. And I have no reason for that, except maybe you're listening via podcast. And you don't need to be told what time it is. It makes no sense for me to tell you it's 9:01 a.m. In the morning. That's what AM actually means. So I didn't need to actually double up on that one. But 9 a.m. for me might not be 9 a.m. for you. Certainly not if you're listening via podcast. But time for another show. And I guess we're past the 9/11 anniversary markings for a while, although there'll still be some making their way across the transom late thanks to social media. But I think we pretty much wrapped that one up yesterday. Good thing too, because it's time for a 9/12 mindset. Although as I recall, there were a lot of people that referred to their having 9/12 mindsets, but then mostly, now that I think about it, that sort of phrasing was more often used for attacking, obviously, Democrats, because Republicans love to use 9/11 as a political attack. Attacking Democrats for having 9/10 mindsets. Like, you're still working as though we are living in a post-9/11 world. You have a 9/10 mindset, whereas we have 9/12 mindsets, which is interesting because they were the ones responsible for the 8/6 mindset that didn't drive George W. Bush or anyone else, I guess, to read the presidential daily briefing with the blaring headline of Bin Laden determined to strike in U.S. But hey, for some reason we marked the 9/11 thing instead of the 8/6 thing, where maybe you could have done something. But maybe there was nothing that could have been done. Who knows? Anyway, I salute the 9/12 mindset today of Gil Aquino, who returns to the show. This is an interesting story. We haven't had one of these yet. Returning to the show as a Patreon sponsor. Things, I guess, got a little bumpy. He's now a full-time student, and so, cash is tight. But he has managed to find a couple of bucks to rejoin us after some rough patch, I guess, in getting things settled. So I appreciate that very much. We haven't had, I don't think, occasion to announce a returning monthly sponsor. But by the way, how about this? Some plaudits, some kudos perhaps, for Gil, who is not only back as a student. It's been somewhat, he says, I've got his permission to tell you at least some of this story. Returning to college after 25-year absence. How do you like that? In order to get a degree, in order to clear the way to go to law school, which ordinarily I would say, no, don't do it. But he points out, the idea here is to get that law degree to become a public defender. This is like a mission at this point. And I can't get in the way of that. I can only give it my ringing endorsement because they're desperately needed. My father did a lot of years as a public defender. Probably too many, he would tell you, in terms of career advancement. But, and he still does a lot, he does a lot less now. Now, it's getting older, right? So it's slowing this thing down, but he's remained chiefly a criminal defense lawyer for the rest of his career. But, I mean, a good long stint, by which I think he would tell you in looking back. I mean, he's proud of what he did, but he probably thought, it wasn't the biggest career advancing choice to make. But back in those days, my dad was, and still is, I mean, he's still with us, so let's not get worried about that. But, eventually we all have to deal with that, so no point in jumping the gun on that one. Thank you very much. But a long career as a public defender, started off, even in law school. I guess this sort of will date you by revealing this information. A draft counselor in his law school days, and I guess for a little while afterwards. So a real ideological bent to his service as an attorney in the early years. And while it was a simpler time and you could get away with that, and there was a time during which you could support a family, doing your work as a public defender. By the 1980s, Ronald Reagan had changed all of that, and things had to change subsequently. So to embark on that now shows a remarkable dedication to the craft and to making it available to those most in need of it. So congratulations. Thank you, both for returning as a sponsor, but more to the point, putting yourself out there and taking on the challenge of becoming, this is a long road ahead to becoming a public defender. So best of luck to you. We'll all be behind you and supporting you, and also thanking you along the way for supporting us, which is really remarkable considering the challenges ahead of you. So there you go. Thanks very much. And yes, even returning college students can find a couple of bucks a month if perhaps, let's say, we help get you through things like this. So think of it like coffee. You wouldn't stop buying yourself coffee so that you could get up in the morning and get to class, or stay up at night and study. We're probably distracting you from studying, but we'll keep it to 2 hours so that you can get back to your books from time to time. All right. Very good. He's got a good long bus ride, it says here, in order to use listening to the podcast. I'm not taking him away from his books. It's not a good idea to read on the bus. It's not good for your eyes. It's not good for anything. So we'll keep you informed while you crack the books open and study the ancient classics, whatever you might be studying on your way to law school. Good luck, Gil. Thanks again for coming back and giving us this opportunity to tell everyone what you're doing with your 9/12 mindset. So let's have more of that, and a little less, a little less Nate Silver and running around being wrong. People are still obsessing with this. I made an offhand comment about it this morning because people were still talking about it. It's one of the more popular things that I've managed to blurt out on Blue Sky anyway, where I'm slowly rebuilding that following that I used to have on the old Bird site. But it's slow going. But interestingly, this is what Greg was talking about yesterday, essentially, Nate Silver. I don't know what possessed him to do this, but I guess it's just one of those moments where I'm a pundit and I'm going to be on a TV show and I need something to say. So he blurts out there's not enough coverage, not enough media discussion, or discussion among, what did he call it? Like the expert classes or something, some sort of elite media attack, which, Nate Silver, he did baseball things. He, as a hobby, translated it over to polling and predicting presidential races, and then all of a sudden he was like a featured New York Times guy, and they had a whole vertical for him, and they paid him a ton of money, and now he's still hanging out in New York City being an expert about the expert class, which is weird and ironic. But anyway, what did he say? Not enough coverage, people aren't taking it seriously enough, or there's not enough elite media coverage of the Biden age issue. And, Greg told us about it yesterday. It was ridiculous because you hear nothing about Biden but that age will be an issue. And no matter how many screenshots of headlines from newspapers around the country talking about exactly that he was shown, he just continued to insist that it just wasn't enough. And, I can't tell you what enough is, but this isn't it. And I guess people are real charged up for talking about that, because all I did, I didn't even remember exactly what I said. There's not enough media coverage of Nate Silver being wrong. It's just supposed to be a little chuckle thing, but I guess it's getting a lot of attention. But it is a legitimate issue. Everyone can see it, right? So I guess, turnabout is fair play. Not that I'm necessarily dedicated to fair play at this point. Speaking of which, let's talk about the plays that won't be fair. Justice gave me, and I'll have to give you, and then we'll have had the tips that he passes along about his views of what's cooking this morning. Let's see, a note about the movement, if you can call it that. I guess we'll just say the weird fad among House Republicans making popular the idea of proceeding with an impeachment against Joe Biden, even though they haven't actually got any particular charges to levy against him. And let's see, what is the second one here? MTG, murdery Trader Greene accuses Ken Buck of being a Confederate soldier in name only. Okay. All right. Well, we'll try and catch up with these stories. Yes, though, my email contains a promotional push from The Hill. Let's see, as under the guise of breaking news, that McCarthy, that would be Kevin McCarthy, nominally Speaker of the House, to endorse Biden impeachment inquiry, setting up a possible vote. I will just note this, that the impeachment inquiry thing is, that's a distinction that you need to pay some attention to. You know, it's not an impeachment by itself. And I have probably outlined over the years, 4 or 5 different times, that, for instance, in terms of determining the importance of a motion and the precedence of a motion on the House floor regarding impeachment of the president or anyone else for that matter, but typically of the president, the question of privilege and when such a question would be considered. I've noted, like I said, probably 4 or 5 times over the years of the show, probably 10 times or more over the course of, since I've been, writing at Daily Kos or elsewhere, maybe even back, I don't know if we covered it back in the days of the last hurrah or not. But anyway, that any member of the House can at any time propose the impeachment of the president and grab the attention of the world, presumably, and redirect the attention of the House of Representatives and try to force them from whatever business they happen to be dealing with at the moment over to impeachment of the president, and that there are different approaches to how you might do that, but that the House makes a distinction in terms of whether or not you'll be recognized immediately for that discussion and what they'll do about it. It changes based on who you are and whether or not you're in leadership, and whether or not you are directly proposing the actual impeachment of the president, as opposed to something weird and more mild, like we should look into impeaching the president. An impeachment inquiry doesn't afford the same level of, it doesn't get afforded the same level of importance on the House floor. But also, if you're a backbencher proposing it, there's all sorts of tricks that the leadership can use if necessary to delay things, push things off for a little while, or schedule for a more convenient time when you'll have that debate. So if you directly propose impeaching the president, I impeach, I accuse president, pick your president. In this case, it's Biden. But I accuse the president of X, Y, and Z, high crimes and misdemeanors, even if they're undefined and you don't bother to define them or provide any evidence that they were perpetrated by the president or anyone else. But if you are making the direct accusation and say we should impeach the president and I want to vote on impeaching the president right now, that's a question of privilege. It's supposed to be, because it's serious and important, and no one would just frivolously make that kind of accusation unless they were prepared to back it up. That was what the designers of the House rules had in mind. And now, of course, anybody can accuse anybody of anything, and they sometimes do it just for fun. But that was supposed to entitle you as a nobody, as a backbencher, if you were at least directly proposing the impeachment. The leadership would have to confer and get together with you and say, all right, well, we need to schedule something here. This is a question of privilege. And at some point inside the next 24 hours or so, we have to find a slot to wedge you in there. And you're entitled to 1 hour of debate over your motion, at which point, at the end of the hour, the leadership, if they find your proposal inconvenient and or stupid or both, can then move to table the motion or to refer it to committee and bury it there. But they don't have to then, have a direct vote on impeaching the president. There's ways to avoid that. Now, on the other hand, if you are not a backbencher, but a floor leader, and you are either moving this at the direction of the majority leader or the minority leader, then you are entitled to have your debate immediately. And you've proposed not only a privileged question, but you've done it from a privileged position, and you can reshape immediately the debate in the House and shift the question to it. Now, they can dispense with it just the same and say off to committee or table it or whatever. Or, there is the option of actually having a direct vote. You don't have to go through an inquiry. You don't have to have an investigation. You don't have to present evidence. None of that is necessary. It's sort of traditional and legitimizes the process in the eyes of observers. But you can, if you hold that kind of sway in the House, show up out of nowhere as the majority leader, minority leader, somebody, or their designee, and say, I directly impeach the president of this, accuse them of this high crime and misdemeanor, and I want your vote right away. No hearings, no nothing. Ordinarily, that's something that I guess we're supposed to assume that the majority would shy away from, just frivolously, or, even with good reason, impeaching the president without having some sort of preliminary televised inquiry to bring the public along with you. At any rate, so very rarely, or if ever, has that ever been used directly. But then the other differentiation is if you are proposing an impeachment inquiry, that too means that lessens the privilege with which the motion will be treated, and changes it from a privileged motion to one that can simply be dispensed with in the ordinary course of business. Especially if you're a backbencher proposing, let's open an impeachment inquiry. That typically doesn't get you to an immediate designation of privilege. Instead, they just treat your resolution as a routine resolution, and they don't give it any floor consideration necessarily. They simply refer it to committee as they would with, a bill to lower the tariff on anything, imports of whatever, distilled water, whatever it might be. Do we even have a tariff on that? I doubt it, right? It's not something we have to import. Anyway, never mind. The point is that there are many ways to diminish the importance of what you're doing. All right. So what we have here, I think, is a hybrid, a less important, less ambitious motion to proposing an impeachment inquiry, but coming from the leadership. So you don't even really need to designate that with privilege. If the leadership is proposing it, the leadership is in charge of scheduling of what goes on the floor. So, they have that prerogative, so they can schedule it. The headline here from the Hill: McCarthy to endorse Biden impeachment inquiry, setting up possible vote. Meaning here that with the leadership's blessing of such a thing, even if it's not a privileged motion, it's very likely to get floor time and a vote. But again, the question will be whether or not to start an inquiry into, can we establish grounds, or can we make it look like we're trying to establish grounds and fail to establish grounds, but then impeach him anyway? Yes, you can. That's the process they want to set off here. Michael Schnell writes this up for The Hill. Speaker Kevin McCarthy will endorse an impeachment inquiry into President Biden this week. A source familiar confirmed to The Hill. I assume a source familiar with this information. But okay, well, they confirmed it to The Hill, setting the scene for a formal vote in the chamber, even though it remains unclear that there is enough support to launch a formal investigation. And that may or may not even be McCarthy's plan. We don't know where he is personally. We don't know what he really thinks about the likelihood of an impeachment. We only know that he's being leveraged into it by his crazy caucus, or conference as they call it. And so, he might be trying to relieve the pressure by saying, well, we're going to have the vote, and hey, if there weren't enough votes for it, what can I do? If you guys want an impeachment inquiry to begin, you're going to have to find the votes for it. I just got out of your way and gave you your day in court, essentially. to make if you haven't convinced enough Republicans that Biden needs to be impeached, that's your problem, not mine. All right. So, there we are. McCarthy intends to tell Republican lawmakers that House Oversight Chair James Comer and House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan have found enough information, not evidence, but information, to back up the need for a formal impeachment inquiry, the source said. Which is amazing because, of course, it is presumably the House Oversight Chair and House Judiciary Chair would be aware of all there is to know, and at this point would have really pretty much found the answer to whether or not an impeachment needs to proceed. But they need more time, and I don't know who they need to look at this. I don't know who they think has been reviewing evidence besides them, but anyway, what this is an indication that no, they still haven't found anything, but they want to open an inquiry in the hopes that something will fall in their laps. I don't know whether they really believe that they're going to be able to produce evidence of something, or they're just saying, well, if we open an inquiry and then something else comes up or someone discovers something we didn't know anything about yet that seems, somehow vaguely scandalous, then the inquiry will already be open and we can just move to impeaching on those grounds. Well, anyway, I guess still McCarthy, will also argue that the launching for a formal inquiry will aid in their effort to try and get a hold of bank records and documents related to the Biden family. I see. So leveraging what we were talking about in the Trump impeachment inquiries, that is putting Congress at the apex of their subpoena powers and presumably coming into court if they were looking to enforce their subpoenas for various other investigations with a little extra juice, right? To be able to say, we have an even greater and more pressing need to get a hold of this information, so the courts should back our subpoenas and generally support our subpoena power because of the seriousness of the investigation. That's actually, the seriousness is the consequences. Removing Biden from office is a serious thing, any president. And so that's what makes it serious. It doesn't necessarily mean that the charges are particularly serious or that they've been particularly serious about gathering evidence for those charges. It just means that serious consequences could result. Anyway, so there you go. They should be able to leverage that and get hold of bank records and documents that they hope will prove something that will make their impeachment inquiry worth their time, in their view. McCarthy plans to call an impeachment inquiry the logical next step in the GOP-led investigations, the source said. The House GOP conference is set to meet behind closed doors twice this week, on Wednesday and Thursday. During Thursday's meeting, Comer and Jordan are scheduled to speak about their investigations. It is unclear during which meeting McCarthy will throw his support behind an inquiry, the source noted. Punchbowl News first reported on McCarthy's plans. His intention to formally back an impeachment inquiry comes after weeks of signaling that the House could go down that path come the fall. And I guess now it's almost the fall. Last month, McCarthy said the House could launch an impeachment inquiry into Biden as soon as the House reconvenes following August recess, and he later called such a move a natural step forward, and now he's going to go ahead and do it, I guess. The question has divided a Republican conference in the lower chamber, with conservatives ready to take the plunge and some moderates wary of going down that path. McCarthy earlier this month said he will only open an impeachment inquiry into Biden if the House formally votes to do so. Well, duh. That's how you actually do it. Though it remains unclear if he has enough support to do so, with Democrats sure to oppose the effort, McCarthy can only afford to lose a handful of Republican votes in the slim GOP majority. Representatives Don Bacon of Nebraska and Mike Lawler of New York, who hail from districts Biden won in 2020, recently said they are not ready to launch an impeachment inquiry. Ken Buck, there we are, a member of the conservative House Freedom Caucus, said this weekend that, quote, there is not a strong enough connection between evidence committees have uncovered on Hunter Biden and the president, because he's a different guy. And Representative Dusty Johnson, that's a real name, not a porn name, the chairman of the influential Main Street Caucus, he's, by the way, from South Dakota, did I mention that? Told CNN, I have not seen that evidence. to launch an inquiry. Conservatives, sort of, put that in scare quotes, for their part, lauded the news of McCarthy's plan to endorse an impeachment inquiry. It's the right thing to do and a tasty way to do it, said, what was his name again? Wilford Brimley, right? No, but that wasn't the quote, nor was it the person who spoke. It is, of course, murdery traitor Greene saying it's the right thing to do and our country deserves the House of Representatives to fully investigate Joe Biden and uncover the entire network who colluded to cover up his crimes from the American people. Blah, 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 blah. So there you go. The Congresswoman said she would not vote to fund the government unless the House opened an impeachment inquiry into Biden. But if it's your fault that one doesn't open, I don't know what you're going to do. Anyway, probably the same thing. You're never going to vote to fund the government anyway. The GOP-led House Oversight, Judiciary, and Ways and Means committees have for months been investigating the Biden family's business dealings from when Joe Biden was vice president. The panels have presented various information throughout this Congress, including bank transactions, testimony from whistleblowers who say the Department of Justice slow-walked the tax crimes investigation into Hunter Biden, and testimony from former Hunter Biden associate Devin Archer, who said Hunter put his father on speakerphone during meetings with foreign business associates. Those conversations, Archer said, were limited to pleasantries. In other words, Archer himself said, yeah, he put him on speakerphone, which is how I heard the conversations. And guess what? It really didn't have anything to do with bribery or influencing policy or anything of the sort. But I guess the implication is supposed to be, well, Hunter's business associates knew that he had a direct line to the president, but I think that was probably obvious from the fact that he was his son at that point. Anyway, that's pretty much the end of the article. We really could have ended this segment a little bit earlier, I suppose. But that's the hot news of the day, I guess, because we're going to have to deal with that, and, thought I'd prepare you for that. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's see, by the way of impeachment news, I guess I'll let you know that I also have a promotional email here from the Houston Chronicle, to which I do not subscribe, so I don't know that I'll be able to actually read you the article, but they do remind me that they are offering ongoing coverage if you're interested in subscribing. I'm sure it's pretty cheap, and you can jump in at any time, but it seems like Houston's a big city, a lot of important things happening in Texas, obviously, but a little bit niche, I think, for our limited budget for subscriptions. But a reminder that they are providing live Paxton impeachment updates. As they note here in their email, the trial is entering the home stretch after the chief of staff's testimony on an alleged affair. I forgot that was even one of the many charges pending against him. Any way I could take a quick peek at what's going on? I know that the paywall will come up, but, we have ways of dealing with that. Let's see what happens if I try to get around it. No, I think they have a very super smart version of things and allows them to block things properly. But okay, well, they're entering their home stretch there, so that's important to know. And I guess when we have an outcome there, we'll hear more about it from more sources and share the news with you. So the other thing in my inbox from the Hill today, we can skip most of, thankfully. 5 pressing questions McCarthy faces as the House reconvenes. And as it turns out, 3 or 4 of them are just other versions of the same question, essentially. I will tell you what those 5 questions as they pose them are. First, will McCarthy open an impeachment inquiry? We've covered that question, so we can move on from there. We're glad of that. Second, of course, you already know the answer to this. Because it's a Tuesday, this was already on your mind. Can McCarthy avert a shutdown? That question and more, very likely to be addressed, throughout our show, but particularly in our last segment, if all is well and Joan McCarter is on the mend, for instance. Okay, can he avert a shutdown? Probably not, but we've been following that for quite some time, and I don't probably need to update you. Well, we'll update you, but I don't need to give you the background of that one. Question number 3, closely related, I think, to the shutdown question, if only because it's part of the appropriations question. Will the House consider Ukraine funding? It is a separate question, but that one, too, we are more or less up to date on, thanks to our, the constant vigilance from Joan and others, bringing us the information that there's a cadre of supposedly conservative Republicans who, for whatever reason, are pro-Russia and essentially unconvinced of at a minimum, unconvinced of the utility of aiding Ukraine, perhaps more to the point, actively uninterested in aiding anyone against Russia. But that's a question, the specifics of which are outlined here. The White House having asked Congress for $24 billion in additional assistance to Ukraine here. And, there being so many pro-Russia Republicans, there's some question as to whether or not Republicans will fulfill their traditionally anti-Russian international policy stance. But for whatever weird reason, they have reversed that in the last 5 years or so. And will they be able to muster the support necessary, especially if so many of them are saying they'll only support Ukraine if no Democrats help them do it, which is impossible. Anyway, the third question posed, or was that, the third question was the Ukraine. The fourth question posed is, will appropriations bills move forward, which is really just another version of the question of, will we avoid a government shutdown? You don't have to have all your appropriations bills individually finished. You can use a CR. You can do an omnibus bill that rolls up but that's the same thing really as moving forward with appropriations bills. But it's the same question asked from a different angle. But that gives us a chance to get down to question number 5, which is also another angle on the impeachment question, sort of, but deserves its own mention. Does McCarthy face a real threat to his gavel? Of course, we've been watching this development since the start of this new Congress, perhaps just a little bit before, once it was obvious that there was going to be a Republican majority, and the fight began over whether or not the lunatics were going to try and or succeed in denying Kevin McCarthy the gavel. 15 ballots. We all know that backstory. Is there a real threat to his gavel? McCarthy has so far avoided direct challenges to his gavel, despite his concession during the Speaker's election to lower the threshold, to bring a motion to vacate the chair, and to force a vote on ousting the Speaker down to just one member. But threats are ticking up. Matt Gaetz is on the radar with this one. And I have another article explaining what he's been up to, parked in pocket. I happened to see Raw Story covering the issue last evening, and there's plenty of coverage now developing from elsewhere, but they've got the first ones to blurt out the headline that I saw last night. Matt Gaetz will make his move against Kevin McCarthy on Tuesday. That's today. And that's according to what they call a report and what you and I would call a tweet. But, what's the story here? Matt Gaetz will make his move, whatever it is, against Speaker McCarthy on Tuesday, according to congressional reporter Annie Carney, who was using the Bird site to make that announcement. What announcement was it? It was just, like I said, a tweet that read, on Tuesday, Gaetz plans to deliver a floor speech laying out a detailed case against McCarthy, but he isn't expected to call for a motion to vacate. But he is laying the groundwork for a potential move to oust him if things reach that point, which is to say Matt Gaetz is going to use the opportunity available to every member of Congress to make a speech. It might be a special order speech. It might be a 1-minute thing. I don't know. But somewhere during a lull in business, he'll be recognized for a couple of minutes. If it's a special order, it comes at the end of the day's work. And he could do a 5-minute one. He could do an hour one. He has those two options. And he's going to get on the floor and cry that Kevin McCarthy is terrible and he wants to remove him from the speakership for whatever his reasons may be. But, you know, that's just, he's going to go to the floor and complain instead of talking to reporters and complain. It may be that he has the muscle eventually to make a move. Whether or not that muscle carries through to actually vacating the chair is a totally separate question. But we've known for a million years that Matt Gaetz sought the spotlight in all this and in everything. So, you know, it's a bit overblown, but I can't fault Raw Story for wanting to make a big deal out of Republicans in disarray. It's true. It's really there and it is a big deal. But is Matt Gaetz making his move? Well, he's moving, but the move is that he's going to go to the floor and say, I'd like to make a move. So it's important to recognize that he's going to go make a speech and then make no motion to vacate the chair. But I guess when somebody else, or when he finally gets around to making the motion to vacate the chair, people will point back to this day and say, you said you were going to do that. Of course, you have said you were going to do that before, too. But now you've said it on the floor of the House of Representatives and asked no one for support or to vote on anything. You just expressed yourself. So that's interesting in a way. So even less important than a motion to start an impeachment inquiry. This is just a speech talking about some future intention. Maybe if he just does some one thing wrong, I might ask other people to join me in an effort to actually do something about Kevin McCarthy. So there you go. We've got that. Now back to what the Hill was saying about it. Well, I guess we'll see how real they think the threat is. McCarthy has so far avoided direct challenges to his gavel, despite those concessions and lowering the threshold to bring a motion to vacate the chair. Gaetz, one of the 6 conservatives who withheld support from McCarthy in January, put the speaker on notice last week, warning that if he impedes on his efforts to force a vote on impeachment, he could lose his gavel. And so what do we find out this morning? McCarthy has decided not to impede Gaetz's moves towards impeachment. Unless, of course, there's still room here for Gaetz to say, no, I want a direct vote on a direct proposition to impeach, not a motion to open an inquiry into an impeachment. But in all likelihood, because Gaetz isn't very likely to succeed or do Republicans any favors by vacating the chair, most Republicans will probably come to the conclusion that, hey, you asked for forward progress on an impeachment. The Speaker of the House has endorsed opening or having a vote on opening an impeachment inquiry. That will be enough for most people to see that in the headlines. They won't understand the nuance, the difference between allowing a vote to go forward on opening an inquiry versus actually impeaching Biden. And enough people will think that you got the concessions that you should go around and hold that up as a prize above your head, and you should be happy with that. And if I ever get around to impeaching Biden in actuality, then I guess great for you. We can all point back to this moment, but everybody's going through the motions here and trying to allow, I don't know what. I guess McCarthy just trying to avoid vacating the speakership by giving a meaningless moment to Matt Gaetz. And Matt Gaetz, I guess, looking to milk that rather than actually do the tough work of removing the speaker and finding a replacement for him. So that's what's actually happening here. If Speaker McCarthy stands in our way, he may not have the job long, Gaetz told conservative radio host Todd Starnes. McCarthy told reporters on Monday that he was not at all worried about the threat from Gaetz. Matt's Matt, McCarthy said. And he may even be right about that. Gaetz upped the rhetoric on social media over the weekend, asking Representative Eric Swalwell of California, whom he frequently spars with, if Democrats would assist with ousting McCarthy. This is on Twitter. Hi, Eric. If I make a motion to remove Kevin, how many Democrat votes can I count on? Now, of course, it's Democratic votes, and he lowercase Democrat, so not likely to result in anything, not because of the punctuation or the grammar, but because it's not in anybody's interest. How many Democrat votes can I count on? Asking for a friend, Gaetz wrote on Twitter. If I'll work with AOC to ban congressional stock trading, I'll absolutely work with Eric Swalwell to rid the House of ineffective leadership. How many votes can you deliver against a motion to table a motion to vacate, Eric? Asking for many friends, Gaetz wrote in a subsequent tweet. Not a particularly powerful ask, since it's not really, I don't see what the interest in removing McCarthy from the speakership is for Democrats. It's something, it's fine to not get in the way of, I guess, but having chaos in the House and having a government shutdown result, not that it wouldn't have resulted anyway, isn't in anybody's interest, certainly not in any particular Democrat's interest. And this sort of infighting and housekeeping is your problem, not ours. And, it might be ordinarily fun to contribute to the chaos. I'm not certain what Democrats are going to do, and I don't know how they're being counseled. But in all likelihood, it's do whatever you want, because I don't think it's up to us to deal with this. But should we be coming to the rescue and be voting no, or be voting yes on a motion to table the motion to vacate? Maybe that's the best thing to do. Just, it's not a show of support for McCarthy so much as it is a desire to move on and actually take care of the business of the House rather than engaging and using up its time, burning its precious floor time on House infighting. You guys need to settle this in your conference meetings, not take up government time with it. I mean, we'll all come and rubber stamp whatever it is you've decided on as a conference, essentially. We might. I mean, probably. But I don't know. I guess maybe the Democrats should probably say, well, if there's unanimity among Republicans that they no longer want McCarthy to lead them as a party, we'll get out of the way and allow you to change leadership. But if it's not unanimous and you just want to eject him from the speakership and there's no realistic chance of filling the speakership with anyone else who can actually guide us through and help us take care of our responsibilities, then no, we'd rather just table that and wait for you to figure out what you're really going to do. It's interesting. And it's also interesting that, even if a little stupid, that I guess Gaetz thinks there's leverage here against Democrats. Like he's going to go to his Republican supporter friends and say, the Democrats wouldn't even help us get rid of Kevin McCarthy. So, it's not going to work with Democrats. Like rank and file voting Democrats aren't going to say, I can't believe I've been abandoned by my party. They had a chance to get rid of Kevin McCarthy. And there are some people for whom this will work, I suppose, but only if they're not thinking through to what happens next. If the speaker's chair remains empty and no one can lead the House through the appropriations process and keep the government running, why is that like a good position to be in for Democrats? Well, I guess we're leading you to think about that here on the show, so you can talk to your friends about why it might be a lot of fun to contribute to the chaos, but it doesn't accomplish anything in particular. And so perhaps not something to endorse. All right. I think neighbors maybe decided to have some power washing done on their house. So we got a little weird vibrating noise going on in the background. Hopefully we can talk straight through that and get to some other material that we need to cover for you. Shall we start? Well, who knows where we'll start with this thing. But let's start with the longer of the two crazy things that I have in store for you. Something that I saw a lot of people interested in and sharing on social media yesterday. And then Greg, on his way out the door, sent this article and said, I forgot to include this in our discussions and in our roundup. And I had already marked it for inclusion in Pocket, but not found time to share it with you. Let's see, by the way, I guess it's, Justice has sent me the Ken Buck Murdery Trader Green controversy, illustrated in articles here with a fantastic, fantastic photo montage of Joe Buck and Murdery Trader Green, but MTG looking particularly like loony, doing one of her weird, aggressive, maybe she ought to be hospitalized faces in this. Where is this? Midas Touch, what shall we call them? Social media impresarios, I suppose. Let's see. MTG lashes out at Republican colleague Ken Buck. The amount of shilling for Joe Biden is astounding, I guess, because Joe Buck says this could be crazy and there could be backlash against us for impeaching him with no particular charges. So Murdery Trader Green is yelling and saying he's shilling for Biden because he doesn't buy into the QAnon line that doesn't matter whether there's evidence or not. Otherworldly demons are insisting that evidence will come. So, all right. Well, at any rate, let me jump over to the article I had in store and that Greg also provided us with on his way out the door yesterday from Politico. You've all probably seen it, and it'll take forever to read through it, but maybe we ought to dedicate ourselves to some discussion of this piece in Politico, written by, who's our author here? Heidi Przyzbala, if I have ever learned to pronounce her name correctly. What Ginni Thomas and Leonard Leo wrought. How a justice's wife and a key activist started a movement. Yes, this has been hinted at 100,000 times and covered by in just as many angles beforehand. But here, I guess, a comprehensive report worth reading through and discussing, thanks to the Supreme Court's Citizens United ruling. A trove of so-called, quote, dark money was about to be unleashed. Two activists prepared to seize the moment, and one of them is Ginni Thomas, and the other is Leonard Leo, so there's no mystery here. But before we even begin on the article, I want to point out here two parallel tracks going on at the moment with a common theme. One, the Citizens United ruling, which at the time, then President Obama called out as a huge problem for American democracy and said that there would be a flood of, I don't even know if we had the term dark money yet, but a flood of undue influence unleashed by money pouring in without transparency and without accountability. To which, as I recall, is that what Sam Alito was shaking his head about at the State of the Union? Wasn't he? I remember that he shook his head and said, no, that's not true. That's not true. And I think it was about Obama making this prediction that there would be these terrible repercussions for American democracy, and Alito saying, no. And very shortly thereafter, he was, of course, proven wrong, and it's only gotten worse since then, and this article will illustrate that. But at the moment, there's also discussion going on about Chief Justice Roberts in his Shelby County decisions about invalidating parts of the Voting Rights Act and essentially declaring, we're post-racist now because we've had a black guy as president. One guy, the end of racism, and we don't need this anymore. And southern states just aren't going to do this kind of open racist discrimination anymore. We're past that. And, wrong, as it turns out. Though I guess there was some basis for somebody like that, some Republican, to be optimistic about it and say, well, we're not going to return to these openly racist roots because, this was the period of time during which the Republican Party is saying, oh, we need to have our autopsy, right? Why did we lose this? And don't we need to be more open and inclusive of racial minorities in our coalition building so that we don't get labeled the white racist party and fall back 50 years to segregation policies? And that was kind of hopeful, and he probably thought, yeah, that is the smart direction, and that is the likely direction because demographics are what they are. It doesn't make any sense to be a rump regional racist party. But then there was Donald Trump, and he said, yes, it does, and let's do it. And he was probably caught a little bit. It's arguable that he was caught a little bit by surprise by that. Maybe because he lived in an ivory tower and he didn't see what was really going on. But at the moment on social media, I think Jamel Bowie actually making that argument that it's highly likely that Roberts just simply was wrong about that and would even acknowledge, I've made that mistake. I didn't think that, for instance, Alabama would be currently in 2023 defying Supreme Court orders essentially to deny black Alabamians a second congressional district in their map. I just didn't think it was a plausible political position to be taking in this day and age. And it turns out he underestimated the overt racism and the interest in overt racism still existing in states governed by the Voting Rights Act. So anyway, I find that an interesting parallel. But now back to Ginni Thomas and Leonard Leo and their exploitation of Citizens United, predicted by Obama, just as everybody predicted a resurgence in at least sly racism, if not open racism, under Shelby County. Okay. So, Heidi Przyzbala, right? Did we get that? Someone out there knows how to pronounce that name. Heidi probably does. Reports this extraordinary long and in-depth piece, and we're going to start it coming up on the break. Ready? The Supreme Court's decision in the 2010 Citizens United case transformed the world of politics. It loosened restrictions on campaign spending and unleashed a flow of anonymous donor money to nonprofit groups run by political activists. Probably should have seen it coming. Maybe the court was ignorant of it. They're ignorant of a lot of things. But those of us who had watched Newt Gingrich operate in the 1990s knew that he was already executing this game plan, and the game plan was in place for anybody else to carry it forward. The interlocking directorates of so-called nonprofit groups that you could organize under nonprofit status, 501c3, C4, or 501h, that's a thing too, and just basically then flout the rules and dare the IRS to come after you. And then when the IRS does come after you, you complain that they're targeting conservatives and conservatives only, even though that wasn't the case. We actually did have all of that happen. It's not theoretical. You remember the progression here. But yes, and so they Newt Gingrich sort of laid the groundwork for exploitation of that ability to paint the IRS into a corner and exploit the fact that they were going to be politically embarrassed out of enforcing the law. So let's use that and go break it. So that's what they did with Citizens United. In the months before the ruling dropped in January of 2010, a group of conservative activists came together ahead of time. It's almost as if they had advanced warning of what the Supreme Court was going to do, did Ginni Thomas and others, came together to create just such an organization. Its mission would be to, at the time, block then President Barack Obama's pet initiatives. In other words, a great civic organization, right? Let's get in the way of the president. We need tax-exempt status. The activists included Federalist Society leader Leonard Leo and his ideological soulmate, the hard-edged activist named Virginia Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, of course. And a quote here, Ginni really wanted to build an organization and be a movement leader. Why? Because it's lucrative and you get people to listen to you and you're famous and you get to have parties where you invite your friends to come over, and because you're a nonprofit organization, you can write off all the costs of the parties where you hold forth and people then go out and execute your vision. It's a great thing to do. I'd be a go-getter and get up early in the morning and be working hard 24 hours a day if every stupid thing I thought should be executed as government policy, there was a cadre of people and some money behind it to go do these things. I'd be working a lot harder if that were the case. Well, anyway, Ginni really wanted to do that. One person familiar with her thinking at the time said Leonard Leo was going to be the conduit of that. She also, of course, had a rich backer. You know who that is now. Harlan Crow, the manufacturing billionaire who helped Thomas and her husband in many ways, from funding luxury vacations to picking up tuition payments for their great nephew. Heidi building on the great work of ProPublica. Now, at the time, the Citizens United ruling was widely expected, as the court had already signaled its intentions. When it came, it upended nearly 100 years of campaign spending restrictions. You thought you knew the law, but you were pretty wrong, the Supreme Court decided. The conservative legal movement seized the moment with greater success than any other group because they designed it and obviously were prepared for it. And the consequences have shaped American jurisprudence and politics in dramatic ways. And it's important to note that it shaped American jurisprudence from the bench. The bench reshaped itself, just as, for instance, in Wisconsin, the legislature reshapes itself. They gerrymander in order to give themselves a supermajority and then use that supermajority to do anything necessary to protect the gerrymandering and the power that they've grabbed with it, up to and including impeaching members of the Supreme Court there. From those early discussions among Leo, Thomas, and Crow would spring a billion-dollar force that has helped remake the judiciary and overturn long-standing legal precedents, in other words, render you pre-wrong, on abortion, affirmative action, and many other issues, which are, of course, coming back to bite them, as we know. It funded legal scholars to devise theories to challenge liberal precedents, helped elect state attorneys general willing to apply those theories, and launched lavish campaigns for conservative judicial nominees who would cite those theories in their rulings from the bench. It's a pretty tight plan, as a matter of fact. The movement's triumphs are now visible, but its engine remains hidden. A billion-dollar network of groups, most of which are registered as tax-exempt charities or social welfare organizations. All improperly so, if you ask me, but we'll be right back. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. Here on Ed Roots Radio, of course. Let's jump right straight back into the Heidi I wish I had checked that beforehand. Article in Politico. The importance, of course, is the substance of the article, not the pronunciation of the name. But thanks, Heidi, for doing this work and building on, as I said, the great work of ProPublica, laying the groundwork for this by illustrating the relationship between the Thomases and Harlan Crow. And, of course, then the connections between Crow and Leo and the way they all got together to use money and to use the IRS's unwillingness to press valid cases against them, that they could be cowed into non-enforcement of the law, and then that they would exploit this loophole in the law, which didn't even really exist, to their own benefit until everyone got used to it and figured it was the norm, and then it was too late to do anything about it. So, taking advantage of gaps in disclosure laws, our players here shielded the identities of most of their donors and some of the recipients of the funds. Among those who've been paid by the groups are leading thinkers and individuals with close personal ties to Leo, including a whopping $7 million to a group run by a close friend and his wife. So, if you're friends with and do the bidding of Leonard Leo, you can make out like a bandit. You can, and if you're, I don't know what to do with myself, gosh, I seem directionless and I need a job. Okay, how about if you will start an organization, the object of which is to make you into an important person that gets invited to conferences and should be listened to. How can you do that? What if we just invested $7 million in an effort to make that, seem like it was reality? Okay. Can we do that? Why would you do that? I don't know. We have $1 billion to play with. Why don't we put $7 million into making you into an important person? Thanks. Well, they also include a for-profit business, by the way, in the network, for which Leo himself is chairman and which receives tens of millions of dollars from his nonprofit network. If he's uncomfortable with the idea of simply siphoning off nonprofit money and paying himself a lavish salary for that, that's okay, because we can always have the nonprofits pay the for-profit. And then if you make millions of dollars from your for-profit organization, no one complains because it's for profit. And I've profited. So what's wrong with that? You aren't going to find conservatives complaining about that. Leo's role as the central figure in this movement has long been known, culminating in his acquisition last year of what many believe to be the largest political donation in history. In history. I need like an echo. Anyway, few are aware of the extent to which the movement's baby steps, though, were taken in concert with Ginni Thomas 2 months before the Citizens United decision. But after the justices had signaled their intentions by requesting new arguments, attorney Cleta Mitchell, if you can believe it, Cleta effing Mitchell, later to play a role in Donald Trump's false claims about the 2020 elections, filed papers for Ginni Thomas to create a non-profit group, quote-unquote non-profit, I would say, of a type that ultimately benefited from the Citizens United decision. What do you know? 2 months beforehand, they had laid the groundwork and were already ready to hit the ground running, but only because Clarence Thomas never tells Ginni what's going on. Leo was one of 2 directors listed on a separate application to conduct business in the state of Virginia. Thomas was the president. She signed all the paperwork on New Year's Eve 2009, and Crow provided much of the initial cash. I can't believe it. That's so wild. A key Leo aide, Sarah Field, would come aboard to help Thomas manage the group, which they called Liberty Central. After Liberty Central went public, well, it provoked an outcry over a Supreme Court justice's wife promoting causes like overturning Obamacare that were before her husband's court. Leo and Thomas then changed gears. His network reactivated a dormant group, the Judicial Education Project, which I believe was originally formed to lobby for the confirmation of ultra-conservative Supreme Court justices and circuit court judges, and push through the nominees to try to get past Democratic blockades and filibusters of those nominations. The Judicial Education Project wasn't necessary anymore after the Gang of 14 deal on judges and the implicit threat that if you actually use your filibuster power, the Republicans would change Senate rules and abolish the filibuster. But that lingered for a while, and then that agreement died out, and shoes changed feet, and it ended up having to be the Democrats to do the dirty work. Anyway, he reactivated the Judicial Education Project, which would go on to become a major supplier of amicus briefs before the nation's highest court, repurposed, I think. Although there's another one that's similar in name that I might be confusing the two. There was the Judicial Crisis Network, and then that changed names a couple of times. They were definitely doing that nominations work. The Judicial Education Project might be something different now that I think about what they're claiming they did here, being a major supplier of amicus briefs before the nation's highest court. In other words, an organization that concerned itself with the laundering of the academic musings of the judges and law professors who were connected to the Federalist Society, who were providing the theories and rationales for making everybody else pre-wrong. They would launder those things into amicus briefs so that they could get in front of judges who could then cite the otherwise useless, meaningless academic assertions that 100, 200 years of precedent were pre-wrong. Okay, so what happened with Judicial Education Project? They reactivated it, and then I think, are we talking about Thomas and or Sarah Field here. She created a for-profit consulting business using a similar name. You see, they ran into a roadblock as a nonprofit, Liberty Central. So they reorganized it as Liberty Consulting, which was for-profit, and that enabled her to perform consulting work for conservative activist groups. The Judicial Education Project supplied some of her business. You're for-profit, but who cares about you? Why are you an interesting entity? Well, we have some big clients. Who are the clients? The Judicial Education Project and people that they refer to us. Documents indicate Leo ordered at least one recipient of his group's funds, Kellyanne Conway, if you've ever heard of her, to make payments to Ginni Thomas for unspecified work, according to a Washington Post story earlier this year. So Heidi doing some great work, weaving together the great work of others on various, tugging at various threads in this tapestry. Now, Liberty Consulting is a focus of interest from congressional committees probing the Supreme Court's ethics disclosures. Senate Democrats have demanded that Leo and Crow provide a list of gifts, payments, or other items of value they've given to Thomas and her husband. Meanwhile, Leo's network of nonprofits, whose annual donations have skyrocketed into the hundreds of millions of dollars, is the subject of an investigation by the Washington, D.C. Attorney General, Politico reported last month. The probe followed a Politico report in March that raised questions about whether Leo's groups were enriching him and his friends by hiring their businesses and donating to their nonprofit groups, just trading checks among nonprofits and keeping each other in business. Together, the probes have combined to raise the question of whether Leo's groups have taken advantage of lax disclosure laws, they have, to send additional business and funds to Ginni Thomas, among other activists. That would be legal, as long as Thomas was providing services commensurate with the payments. The real question then is, what is Ginni Thomas qualified to do? What did they pay her to do, and was it fair market value? Said Laura Solomon, a Pennsylvania tax attorney who represents hundreds of charitable and other tax-exempt organizations and philanthropists. Leo, Thomas, Crow, and Conway did not respond to questions about their financial relationships and whether Leo's groups continued to ask contractors to work with Thomas. Asked how much money overall Leo has directed to Thomas, when the payments began and if they ever stopped, a Leo spokesman responded, no comment. Thomas's representative, attorney Mark Paoletta, did not respond to questions. But, by the way, is it entirely clear the dynamic there? When they mentioned it, reminded me of this, whether Leo's groups continued to ask contractors to work with Thomas. The relationship between the Federalist Society, say, and other nonprofits that Leo has a hand in running, and Kellyanne Conway. Kellyanne Conway was, originally a pollster before she became, Trump campaign official and then Trump White House official. But as a pollster, if she was hired by one or another of the Leo groups, I want you to conduct some polling on, judicial nominations issues or what have you. But interestingly, basically they would make it a condition. We'll pay you $25 million to do our polling. Now, you'll only need, a fair market value for the polling we're asking you to do. I'm making up the number $25 million. But if a fair market value for the polling we're asking you to do was, say, $20 million, which it isn't, but you could make a condition. The accusation here is that Leo makes a precondition, written or otherwise, probably just a wink and a nod. I'll pay you $25 million to do polling worth $20 million. On a condition that you hire or you contract on your own. Take your polling company, Kellyanne Conway, and I want you to come up with some excuse for signing a contract with Liberty Central or Liberty Consulting, whichever one you choose, I guess, whichever one fits the bill for you. And that contract, I don't care what it's for, I don't care what you do. I know where Ginni Thomas wants to spend her time, so it'll probably inure to the benefit of the conservative movement. But I don't care what you hire her for, but pay her $5 million to do it. Remember, I asked you to do some polling. You gave me a bid. The bid was $20 million, what have you. $20 million. I will pay you $25 million with the understanding, not necessarily included in the contract, that $5 million or will find its way to Ginni Thomas. I just need you to launder it through you so that Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society isn't paying Ginni Thomas. Kellyanne Conway's The Polling Company, whatever, I think she calls her place the Polling Company, will be paying Ginni Thomas for, legitimate reasons, whatever it might be. Your job is to come up with the excuses to why you're paying Ginni Thomas so that I don't have to do it. I am doing it because you're just a pass-through, but it looks on paper like you're doing it. That's the scheme here, just in case you didn't glean that from my reading of Heidi's writing. It's probably much cleaner if you just read straight through the article. In a July 25th letter to Congress, Leo's lawyers said his advocacy work is protected under the First Amendment and that any congressional inquiry into his relationships with Supreme Court justices is politically charged and tantamount to harassment. In a July interview with the Maine Wire, Maine like the state, a conservative outlet near his home, Leo spoke about his efforts to, quote, defend the Constitution and why his nonprofit groups don't reveal their donors. It's not to hide in the shadows, he said, meaning it's to hide in the shadows. It's because we want ideas judged by their own moral and intellectual force. Ah, I see. So, next section, launching a movement, begins here. Many people trace the start of the conservative legal movement to 1982, the year of the founding of the Federalist Society, which provided a forum for law students and professors with conservative ideas to incubate their theories. But the movement that has had such a profound impact on the courts today, one that involves money and politics more than legal theories or principles, gained steam in the wake of the Citizens United decision. The case followed a highly unusual path, one blazed by a 5-justice conservative majority who seemed determined to strike a blow against campaign finance restrictions. Initially, the dispute centered on whether a conservative nonprofit's unflattering documentary of former Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton violated campaign finance laws. Instead of resolving the case along the lines argued by the lawyers, who were actually handling the case, the justices took the unusual step of asking for re-arguments based on a sweeping question whether they should overrule prior decisions approving laws that limited spending on political campaigns. The lawyers had their own picture of how the case would turn, but for some strange reason, 5 conservative justices got together and said, we're going to decide it on a totally different basis. I want a rehearing on not the narrow questions as defined by both parties to this actual case, but how about I want to entertain the judicial theories sponsored essentially by activities like the Federalist Society. I would like to read a brief on how we should just overturn 100 years of limitations on political spending, and that we've been on the wrong track for a full 100 years, and everything that you thought you knew about campaign finance and the right to restrict it is wrong. That re-argument took place on September 9th, 2009. 2 months later, on November 6th, Cleta effing Mitchell, filed an IRS application on behalf of Ginni Thomas to form the group that became Liberty Central Incorporated. Paperwork Thomas signed on New Year's Eve listed Leo, then the Federalist Society's executive vice president, as one of 2 directors. Field, one of Leo's right-hand people on state courts at the Federalist Society, came aboard to help Thomas in her new endeavor. Neither Field nor Mitchell responded to requests for comment, of course. The application was approved 7 days before Clarence Thomas joined the 5-4 majority on a decision that would open the door to a new era of major spending on groups like the one his wife was forming. What do you know? No wonder he approved of it. After putting up $500,000, the lion's share of her nonprofit's seed money, Harlan Crow held an event for Ginni Thomas at his palatial home in Dallas. The group later made clear its goal was disassembling President Barack Obama's agenda, mainly the Affordable Care Act. Justice Anthony Kennedy, a Ronald Reagan appointee, assumed in his majority opinion in Citizens United that donations and spending around such groups would be transparent. What a dumb assumption. Justice Thomas, in his concurring opinion, argued against forcibly disclosed donor information, which could preempt citizens' exercise of their First Amendment rights. No, it just tells you who's saying things. I don't know that the First Amendment necessarily guarantees anonymity for expression of your political opinions, but why not make everybody pre-wrong about that and say it does? Even though there was no precedent that said that, and everybody had grown up with the assumption that no, it doesn't. You're free to do it, but it has to be done in a way that leaves other people free to figure out who's saying what. But you were pretty wrong about that. The Citizens United decision, which extended free speech rights to corporations, nonprofits, and unions, to be fair, I guess, effectively curbed efforts to rein in political spending, while paving the way for follow-up rulings from courts and federal election commission, the FEC, that would unleash additional billions of dollars in donations. These donors would spawn a boom in tax-exempt, quote-unquote, charitable and, quote-unquote, social welfare groups as vehicles for spending on political activity. This despite the fact that the rules at the time, and still, say, no, there can't be any political activity from tax-exempt groups. But now they look the other way because Shirley Sherrod, wasn't that the name of the IRS official who got pilloried from the Obama campaign for actually saying, hey, that's not what the law says. The law says the opposite. We should be stopping this from happening. And they bullied the IRS out of doing it. A key part of the attraction to these groups was that they could shield the identity of donors, many of whom are reluctant to invite scrutiny of their own agendas. Next section, speaking out. Just 5 weeks after the decision, on February 18th, Ginni Thomas took the stage at CPAC. You know what it is. It's an annual gathering of the nation's most prominent conservative activists and now lunatics. Wearing a white t-shirt emblazoned with a Liberty Central logo, Thomas introduced herself as an, quote, ready for this one, ordinary citizen from Omaha, Nebraska, who felt called to the front lines of a battle against arrogant elites who think they know how to manage our lives from cradle to grave. She evoked the passing of patriots, including her 91-year-old mother and Barbara Olson, who had perished in the plane that hit the Pentagon on September 11th, as her inspiration. When she was gone, I knew I had to work harder, Thomas said of Olson, whose widower, Ted, had been a lawyer for Citizens United, oddly enough. Thomas did not credit Crow, Leo, or the Citizens United decision for her new grassroots initiative. That year, she was paid $120,500 from Liberty Central, according to tax records. The group was destined to have only a short lifespan, thanks in part to a misstep by Thomas. I can't believe it. A misstep? In October, she left a voicemail for Anita Hill. You know who she is. The woman, the attorney, the respected attorney, they could have said, but the woman who had accused her husband of sexual harassment during his confirmation hearings in 1991. And in it, Thomas demanded an apology for the 19-year-old accusations. And the quote here, I would love you to consider an apology sometime and some full explanation of why you did what you did with my husband, Thomas reportedly said, asking Hill to pray about this. This is, just her first, maybe not her first, dive into revisionist history. I believe that you owe us an apology because I believe that you were lying when in fact the truth is that she probably was not. And, whatever, but just the same thing. I believe that, Trump won the election. Probably not, but I believe it anyway. The ensuing news reports drew unwanted attention to Thomas's new nonprofit, which by then was expressly targeting Obama and his agenda. I guess she was just feeling her oats there and thought that now I have been set up explicitly as a power broker. I want to broker my power for what? Policy? No. Leveraging an apology from Anita Hill. Well, you don't actually have that power. Oops. And you've now jeopardized the power that we thought we would be giving you. Oops. I better reorganize under a different name and ensure people that they won't get in trouble for my mouth when they donate money to my group. I need opacity for that. Anyway, The ensuing news reports drew unwanted attention. The news led many ethics specialists to question whether it was appropriate for a Supreme Court justice's spouse to be leading such a political effort, especially with the court preparing to consider a high-profile challenge to Obama's health care initiative. The following month, it was reported that Thomas was stepping down from her top leadership position at Liberty Central, which was eventually absorbed into another nonprofit. Leo came to her defense, bemoaning the spat of press stories about a single phone call that she made. That's a single phone call. Right. Why all this controversy about that single bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima? It's not a big deal. It was just one. Anyway, I think he means spate of press stories, but spat about the press stories would have been appropriate. Anyway, so she's stepping down to get out of the spotlight, except she's stepping down and into another role, which is just the reorganized Liberty Central with a new name. Big deal. Incorporation records show Thomas had already pivoted to form her own for-profit consulting firm in the state of Virginia. On November 16th, Thomas' expedited service request to incorporate her consulting business was approved, and Leo turned to another vehicle that he could use to pay her with no apparent paper trail, the Judicial Education Project, a tax-exempt charity that had been founded by 3 of Leo's associates in 2004. Oh, what was happening around 2004? That would have been the initial nuclear option crisis precipitated by the Democratic blockade of 5 nominees by George W. Bush to circuit courts and eventually to the Supreme Court. But anyway, Judicial Education Project soon became dormant and was reactivated and began receiving donations in 2010. And far from retreating, Thomas merely moved her networking behind the scenes. She remained active in the conservative legal movement for sure, said the person who had attended early meetings about her plans and who was granted anonymity to discuss private meetings. People just always assumed she had to stay below the radar. She was a frequent attendee at major coordinating events among conservative nonprofits and was considered a very popular activist figure, the person said. Thomas's brief run as president of her own nonprofit had given her a taste of a lifelong dream. Thomas grew up tagging along with her mother, a Nebraska GOP party activist. A 1986 Good Housekeeping article that mentioned the young Virginia Lamp as she aspired to run for Congress, but her biggest, things have jumped here because of a pop-up ad here. Where did we go? Here we are. Good Housekeeping article, right. They mentioned a young Virginia Lamp as she aspired to run for Congress, but her biggest challenge was finding a husband who'll be supportive of a woman in public life. And that would be difficult among conservative activists at the time, no doubt. Liberty Central had been explicit about its intent to assist citizen activists, launching an activism how-to website in August and an ad campaign a month before the 2010 midterm elections, in which challenging Obamacare was the conservative movement's primary objective. Thomas continued her activism after leaving the nonprofit, quote-unquote, I would say, leaving the nonprofit, with Leo helping to send money in her direction. According to the documents obtained by the Post, Leo told Conway, all right, I just had the number of zeros wrong. Leo told Conway he wanted her to give another $25K, not 25 mil, but $25K to Thomas, and that the records should have no mention of Ginni, of course. At Leo's behest, Conway's polling firm billed the Leo-affiliated JEP, the Judicial Education Project, $25,000 that day as a supplement for constitution polling and opinion consulting, the documents show. When you do work that's as nebulous as polling and political consulting in general, you can do that. Well, okay, I want to give $25,000 to Ginni Thomas. I just can't be seen doing it. All right. What we'll do is I'll ask my polling firm to bill me $25,000 for some made-up thing. I'll pay them the $25K, and they'll pass it to Ginni Thomas in exchange for something equally nebulous. In all, Leo arranged for between $80,000 and $100,000 to go to Thomas through Conway for unspecified work in 2011 and 12, according to the documents, and also paid for all their vacations and for their great nephew to attend private school. So she was benefiting pretty well. They're just hiding the ball because otherwise it would look bad, right? If they were super proud of the relationship, They could have been open about it, except it was also illegal and probably unethical. So, they were a little embarrassed about it. Next up, limiting disclosures. There is no direct paper trail for JEP's spending on Conway's business, let alone Thomas. The IRS requires that nonprofits must identify only their top 5 highest paid contractors making more than $100,000 annually. But that leaves many contractors off the list. True North Research, an investigative watchdog group, found at least $25 million of the $240 million that JEP had spent on grants and expenses since 2010, including salaries and contractor fees, went to people whose identities were not revealed. That was, of course, the whole idea of this network. This money could have gone to anyone, said Lisa Graves, the leader of True North Research and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Clinton administration. Ooh, I'm a little late on the music here, but we'll cut out. And that'll bring us to our fourth segment today. So we may jump out of the reading of this and discuss other things. Let's say, stuff pending before Congress in the next couple of weeks before the end of the fiscal year. Wink, wink. Anyway, just wanted to sort of get some of this on the record. We'll continue to discuss it because it is a sprawling story, let's say.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We've bumped into our fourth segment, which means, of course, it will, ordinarily would have meant that I would say, all right, well, let's suspend the reading of this massive expose of what Ginni Thomas has been up to and pick it up again tomorrow, because it's time to talk to Joan McCarter about all the various things happening in Congress or not happening in Congress. Various other topics that we want to touch on. But as it turns out, well, one, Joan is here. Hello, Joan.
Hello.
And two, this is the topic of interest, as a matter of fact. And Joan has been reading it and writing about it. And so this will really help us cut down on something that could take us like 6 days to read through and comment on thoroughly. But also gives us a chance to make the segue that much smoother, because instead of simply departing from this subject, we can talk to Joan about it instead. So, okay, you're here. How you doing? How you feeling?
I'm finally testing negative, and I'm
wonderful.
On the road to recovery.
Okay, so that's good news. But yeah, I can. It feels like it might be a little rough for you on the voice, but if it gets too much, we would understand it. But thanks for joining in, and you're already on this subject, and I don't see how you could not be. You've been on it for several years anyway, so no wonder it was a natural area of interest to you. So let's see, anything that we haven't gotten to yet that's super important? Give us a preview maybe of what's left of this story.
For me, the part that really stuck out is the timeline set out.
Okay.
For when the Supreme Court decided to take on the case, when the Supreme Court decided to expand the case from beyond just the issue of whether Citizens United violated campaign finance laws in producing the anti-Hillary Clinton documentary, to whether they should consider campaign finance laws as constitutional at all.
Okay.
So then the rehearing of the case on this expanded basis, and how with every step of the way, Liberty Central was being crafted by Leo and Thomas and Cleta Mitchell. I mean, they were on parallel tracks, which suggests that Clarence and Ginni and possibly, who knows, Alito and... Wait, when did Alito get on?
Oh, good question.
At any rate, there was obviously, to my eye, discussion happening between justices, conservative justices, and Leo and Thomas about how they could set up this new nonprofit that the Citizens United decision was going to allow. I mean, possibly you could look at what the Supreme Court was doing and say, looks like we're in trouble here. But the dates line up between Supreme Court action and Mitchell, Leo, Thomas action so directly that it really looks like there was some collusion going on there.
It certainly does. By the way, Alito, confirmed to the court in 2006.
Yep.
So
okay.
He's there and sitting there. And did I have
and we know Alito has an alleged history of sharing decisions with folks that he likes.
Yeah.
Before they're actually issued.
That's true. And, now that you bring that up and you talk about the importance of the timeline and the seeming foreknowledge of where Citizens United was headed, maybe dictating the timeline for Thomas and Mitchell and others and Leo to set things up so that they could hit the ground running when the opinion dropped. Fast forward however many years later, and we're all scratching our head. How did there come to be a leak from the Supreme Court about the decision to overturn another longstanding precedent that managed to make it into the press, but we don't know where the leak came from. It must have been liberals that did it, though, not the people who actually have a demonstrated history of taking advantage of insider knowledge of where the court was going to file paperwork to be ready to hit the ground running with a new kind of organization that was going to be legalized after 100 years of being illegal or anything like that. Those, of course, wouldn't be suspects in a Supreme Court leak. No. Why look there?
So that's the part that really struck me.
I can see
why. That, this is potentially really deep, long-standing corruption on the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Like it's their business.
It's their business.
As a matter of fact.
By the way, the fact that, Leonard, Leo, and Harlan Crow have been subsidizing both Thomases.
Yeah. Well,
their whole family for who knows how long.
Right.
That part's kind of hard to miss too.
He's got
all
that hobby.
Crows talk about how he's not at all really that politico, and he's just political, and he's just such good friends with the Thomases, and it doesn't have anything to do with politics. It doesn't have anything to do with how the Supreme Court operates or what they're deciding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's just something that he might have this claim. It might actually turn out to be true that this is just something that both Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo like to do for their friends, is engineer ways to make them wealthy. And to, I don't know why.
And just out of the generosity of their heart.
Yeah. I just like people around me to be wealthy. That's all. It's just a weird hobby that I have.
And of course, the other part of this is the Leo dark money corrupt web of organizations influencing the court.
Yeah, right.
And, one of the things that Preswell talks about is how they've started crafting these amici briefs that basically lay out what they do the homework for the conservative justices.
Yes.
in their briefs. They say, here's the arguments you need to put into your decision. And the conservative justices do it.
Yeah. I mean, the easiest parallel that comes to mind for me there is it's kind of like you didn't think this was necessary because you thought justices were erudite, well-spoken, and accomplished writers, but chiefly it's their clerks.
They're clerks.
But they also, I mean, generally they have had backgrounds as clerks. You know, it's not that like they're idiots. But in case you get a bunch of idiots and you need erudite work to be presented as their own, it's kind of like an ALEC for the Supreme Court. These briefs is if you don't know, or occasionally, sometimes these theories are a little too loony, and even a really accomplished jurist will be like, I don't see what you're saying exactly because none of this holds. This is not logical and doesn't follow from precedent. I'm embarrassed to write this. They might just say, well, we'll write it. You just have to be willing to put your name to it, which, it's no less embarrassing, but, it's easier. You might say, I'll tell you what, I'll trade it for access to a super yacht. That I could be embarrassed for. Oh, all right. Well, let's do it that way then. And now you are the thought leader on this, even though it was really some other lunatic, but that lunatic isn't yet on the Supreme Court, so they can't claim the boat ride. The boat ride goes to you for signing this person's work. Oh, all right. Well, that's a pretty good arrangement. And, well, what about this other person? Won't they be jealous? We'll eventually put them on the Fifth Circuit. They won't be upset for long. So
pretty much
they'll get their reward. Yeah. Okay. By the way, did I remember correctly what was Alito shaking his head about at the State of the Union and saying not true? Wasn't it Obama's correct prediction that Citizens United would upend everything and destroy American politics?
Yep.
Okay.
Citizens United.
There we go. So, all right. So he was in place in time for that, and for whatever reason chose very visibly to cover for the Thomases and all of that, though I suspect it was probably because he was really covering for himself because he was planning on stealing money the same way. But
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
He's been less blatant about it, I guess. But yeah, he's on the grift train too.
Yeah. Maybe he's been less. Well, he's certainly been caught out doing less, but maybe it's just a matter of time, and eventually we'll say, oh, actually, he's the worse of the two. But it may be.
What's most concerning about Alito versus Thomas. Thomas apparently is mostly just getting all of this stuff from Harlan Crow, and it's not a lot of stuff directly involved with court business. On the other hand, with Alito, he's cozied up to a lot of the people who come before the court with cases, including David Rifkin, the latest big scandal for Alito. Rifkin is the Federal Society lawyer who clerked for Alito, I believe, who was also a columnist at the Wall Street Journal and who conducted that big interview with Alito at the Wall Street Journal about how, no, the Senate, the Congress don't have any power over us. They don't get to tell us what we get to do. So, Rifkin is also the lead attorney on a big, potentially momentous tax case that is coming before the court this fall. Alito is not recusing from that case. Alito made a big point last week. Last week? Was it Friday? Of saying, I am not recusing from this case, even though... Because I have the complete power of putting aside my previous relationship, my ongoing, continuing relationship and close friendship with this lawyer who's arguing before me. I am a Supreme Court justice. I am above being influenced by that.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice. I mean, it would be a nice thing to believe about Supreme Court justices that they have the intellectual power and capacity to do that. You kind of hope that they would, but the whole purpose of the recusal canon is not everybody's going to believe you. And even though you're probably right that you would totally be able to do that, it's best to avoid the appearance of impropriety and just say, well, the rest of the Supreme Court is certainly as adept and as smart as me, and so we'll just let them decide it, so that it, because it's a sop to the, that stupid concept. What was it? Oh yeah, the integrity of the Supreme Court. That was it.
Yes.
Right. That, I value the institution. It's best for the institution if we avoid any appearance of impropriety. Certainly, I feel like I have something valid to add to this discussion, but the other 8 are just as smart and just as honest, and they'll do it right. But by not recusing yourself.
To it. And clearly Alito believes he's the smartest one on the court.
Yes.
So.
Or he knows, maybe there are several others who are just as corrupt as me. And so either it makes no sense to exclude me when there are so many other corrupt people, or
I'm sure
no
he
one
doesn't consider himself corrupt.
Of course not.
He considers himself correct.
Yes, right. It's correct. You all thought you were, not only were you pre-wrong about the law, you were pre-wrong about what corruption is. What I'm doing is not corruption. What the other guys are doing, if they're on my side, that is also not corruption. If they are on the other side, that obviously is corruption. You should probably do something about that.
It would be an interesting place to be this fall.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to see how, in person, behind closed doors, Chief Justice John Roberts is handling all of this.
Yeah.
Having Alito just blatantly thumb his nose at him when Roberts says,
yeah,
well, we all abide by the ethics rules. I trust all of these justices to police themselves. That's what they do. And to have Alito say, yeah, here, F you.
I might not. I wonder whether it's at any point ever galling to him. And what does he do with this information of, like, how come, am I the only one not getting super yacht use out of this, or going on fancy vacations somewhere, or maybe I am going to a few, I don't know.
Too.
Yeah.
His big issue is his spouse.
Yes.
And his failure to disclose her salary.
Yeah. And what she does
the failure to disclose the commissions she gets as a headhunter for some of the top legal firms, the lawyers she places who end up arguing before the Supreme Court. That's messy too.
Yes, that's true.
Roberts isn't above this.
No, I wonder whether he thinks that through, or says, well, it's one thing to say, okay, so my wife earns a lot of money so we can both drive fancy cars and belong to a country club, but that's not nearly as bad. I'm not taking, $500,000 trips on someone else's tab. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. You're probably taking $500,000 trips on, quote unquote, your own tab, just because, I don't know, some strange circle of elite legal practitioners think it's okay to pay your wife lots and lots of money because, it's not direct interference with you. It just pretty much determines who will be arguing in front of you, because she's placing people at the top white shoe law firms that constantly handle Supreme Court cases. Right. And who are these wink, wink,
top white shoe law firms going to go to because of their Supreme Court business? They're going to go to the wife of the Chief Justice when they need to recruit new talent.
Yeah, even though there's a whole mechanism out there specifically geared towards helping recruiters at top law firms identify who the talent is and where they should go for it. There's plenty of other people on the take for that too, by the way. But it couldn't hurt if we were also paying the Chief Justice's wife lots of money. And that might help him think, these people are qualified to be arguing in front of me. And other people aren't because they're paying someone else. That's bad. So between that and what's going on at Yale Law, and how they essentially, just to borrow a term, groom people for service on the Supreme Court as clerks, and then as white shoe attorneys appearing before them. And, I don't know. If they don't go into that line of the business, they could go into helping build the network of nonprofits for Ginni Thomas, say.
Right.
Various ways to go after that. But yeah, it's a very interesting parallel to as I was saying earlier, to the Wisconsin story of like this snake that keeps eating its own tail, right? You just constantly building a network that supports the work you do in building networks, essentially. Yeah. And protecting yourself from judgment on it by determining who are the pool of people that can become federal judges and later Supreme Court justices, and ensuring that even when you're doing something that violates 100 years worth of precedent in law, one of the things you can do is overrule all of that so that nobody gets in trouble and goes to jail. Like your wife, for instance. What a neat trick that is, if you get to determine what the law is.
What a neat trick. The only saving grace in all of this, it's horrifying that this is our Supreme Court and that they are deciding life and death stuff for all of us.
Yeah. Right.
They are being so absolutely blatant about it that even Dick Durbin is saying, wow, we really need to do something.
Yeah, as opposed to just look into it or form a blue ribbon commission. Yeah, and poor Justice Kagan probably thinking, I really would have enjoyed those bagels.
Right.
And probably could have gotten away with it in light of this. But you know what? Probably not. Probably not. The House would be opening an investigation into impeaching her right now if she had taken the bagels. And
absolutely.
For all I know, they may already be doing it and saying, well, she probably secretly took the bagels delivered by space laser, and we just didn't find out. And the space laser wiped out the evidence, and clearly we should impeach her for it. So,
which segues us nicely into the House.
Yes. That's what they're working on. Okay.
And soon to be back and soon to be in total chaos as usual.
Yes.
Even more.
Good. Fine.
Over shutting down the government and impeaching Biden, and thanks to Matt Gaetz, possibly a challenge to vacate the chair.
Yeah. So. I understand that the word yesterday was that, he's going to, I guess, I imagine he'll use a special order speech or something, and might just say, I'm totally thinking about it.
That's the impression I have.
Yeah, okay.
Meanwhile, McCarthy is saying, sure, I'm fine. There's a reason to start this impeachment inquiry.
Yeah, the reason is we need to find the reason.
Asked him to, as she threatened a government shutdown if she didn't get it. So, okay.
Right.
Let's do that, says
Kevin
McCarthy.
Anyway.
Meanwhile, you've got Ken Buck, who is like the Freedom Caucus-ish, most Freedom Caucus member. I mean, Ken Buck is the prototype of a Freedom Caucus member. Maverick, opposing leadership, going his own way, doing his own thing.
Okay.
He's on the outs now with leadership because he thinks impeachment is a bad idea. Because there isn't evidence for it. Because this is absurd.
Yeah.
He said on MSNBC this weekend.
I hate to say it, but he's right.
He's right. And he is as radical a political extremist as any, but he also was a federal prosecutor, and he also kind of understands how stuff is supposed to work.
Yeah.
Like, you have to have evidence in order to start prosecuting somebody.
Yeah, usually. Of course, he could be pretty wrong about all of that, and it turns out you don't. And largely the idea of starting the inquiry now is, what's really happening is normally you're supposed to have evidence of these things, and then you will inquire as to, is there more, and how can we tell the story of the evidence in order to justify the impeachment. But this new trick is, we don't have evidence, but we have enough evidence to question whether there's more evidence somewhere. So let's open an inquiry in order to find the evidence that we need to impeach, because we don't have it yet. Well, to a prosecutor, that's offensive, and properly so. To the House of Representatives, apparently not so much, because one, they don't care, and two, lawyers are elitists anyway. So all this whole stupid book learning idea about how things are supposed to work is really just, they're just spitting in the face of us common folk who work for a living. Let's impeach first and we'll find the evidence later. And if that's not how you think it works, then your mind is being manipulated by space lasers. Possibly
Which is
Jewish.
apparently the position that leadership is now taking.
Awesome. Because that's very leaderly.
And you know what? We're going to have a shutdown anyway.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And
Because,
murdery Trader Green would never help
impeachment,
us
then
anyway.
it's going to be funding for Ukraine or
Yeah.
COVID or who knows what.
Right. They don't need, they'll invent an excuse not to vote for funding the government. Like Green's threat, unless we have the impeachment, then I won't vote to da-da-da. Fine. You'll have the impeachment movement or whatever it is you want to, an inquiry. And of course, you could just point to that and say, but that's not the same thing as an impeachment, so I'm not voting for it. Even if they had impeached and removed, convicted Biden, she wouldn't be voting to continue to fund the government. She'd find something else.
Well, or if Green goes along with it, then somebody else is going to pop up and say, nope, can't do it.
Yeah,
So,
well, right, in case, if she finds herself somehow painted into a corner and I can't be the one to blow it up, you do it. Okay.
that's going to have to be Boebert, because Boebert now has apparently lost the fight with Green on impeachment. Maybe. I don't know.
Has she? I don't even know where Boebert is on that. So
She's been quiet. So
yeah. Well, she got beat up, although she did manage, didn't she get Green kicked out of the Freedom Caucus?
Whether it was her
or something,
we don't know for sure who, but probably Boebert. Buck may have been involved in this. That might be part of
that would
Green's
explain
problem with Buck. I don't know.
Yeah, so I guess she thinks maybe I'll get him kicked out because he kicked me out.
This is just junior high.
Yeah, well, that's being optimistic. It feels like kindergarten. But okay. Yeah, I mean, all right, so there's no way out of this chaos they're leading us towards. It'll likely mean shutdown, or at least partial shutdown. Though I guess McCarthy is kind of thinking, I assume he's thinking, well, I'll go along with the impeachment demands so that we might have a shot at getting the government funded, but I'm not so sure he's interested in doing it. But
the problem for McCarthy, of course, is that he's got to have Senate and White House agreement on what he does.
Yeah.
And the Senate is like, Senate Republicans want to have absolutely nothing to do with impeachment. They want to have absolutely nothing to do with not funding Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
They are, you see a united front, bipartisan, in the Senate against the House.
Yeah. Oh, that's often the case.
I don't know how this is going to work out. I mean, clearly the thing that has to happen is that the majority of House Republicans who do not want to shut down government and who do not want to impeach Biden because they know that that's political suicide for them, will say, Kev, don't do it. And it would help if all of the Republican senators who don't want these things to happen went to the Republicans in their home states and said, you can't go along with this crazy shit. You got to do something, and you got to tell McCarthy to stop it. That would help.
Yeah, I guess. Although, I imagine at this point, he's probably saying, I don't know, what do you want me to do? I mean, if I don't give in to this demand, what's the point of negotiating with me about what we're going to do in the future? Because I won't be here. You're going to have this whole negotiation all over again with who knows who.
Well, that's the other part of it. Nobody wants the job. McCarthy was the only person who wanted to do this.
Yeah. Although there were some people that, I guess, fantasized about
doing
it.
But this might be what Gaetz is thinking.
I guess.
I don't know.
Yeah. possibly, but we don't know. He's not taking any bold steps towards it today. I think, what we'll see today, though he managed to get headlines out of it, is he's going to have an opportunity to cry about how he doesn't like Kevin McCarthy. But we know that. He's not going to make any motion.
Yeah,
I don't. We've made it so easy to vacate the chair.
The ship's already sailed on all of this.
I guess.
With the impeachment stuff, with McCarthy caving on starting an impeachment inquiry. Mm-hmm. By all accounts. It's not official yet, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean,
so Gaetz popping up with this now. All I can figure is it's an attention-getting thing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he likes to be at the center of attention, and then if there is in fact an agreement to go ahead with an impeachment inquiry, then it looks like he forced it, because here's footage of me making a speech. Yeah. And not footage of the fact that the chamber is empty when I make the speech, which is an old trick. That's Newt Gingrich's favorite trick, right? I'm going to make a speech to an empty chamber and then circulate footage of me making this demand, and then that thing happening, even though that thing started happening before I made my speech. And if I edit the video that goes out afterwards, it looks like I made it happen. So I guess maybe that's the play. All right. Well, the end result of it all may be a gigantic government shutdown, but we've been warning of that since 1989, I guess. It certainly feels that way. But thanks for joining us again to do it, and it was good karma. It worked out well in that you had already been writing on Heidi Przybyla's piece. So everyone can turn to that.
I gotta say that Przybyla single-handedly makes Politico not such a swamp.
Excellent. All right, that's a ringing endorsement, honestly. So, yeah, we'll be thumbing through the rest of it, and let me also point you to Joan's writing on it in case it's too long, didn't read it. Easy to become the case. It's a very long article.
Yes, it's a very long article.
But we read it so that we read it so that you'll want to afterwards, even
Precisely.
if you can't. All right. Excellent. Thanks again, Joan. We'll check in with you in a week, and we'll be that much closer to the end of September at that point, and we still won't know what the hell's going on, but we'll talk about it nonetheless.
Never.
All right. See you then.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
That's right, and time now for you to listen to Justice Putnam with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. They'll obviously be talking about the same issue here. He's got plans for talking about Ginni Thomas and Leonard Leo, but, there are some other things happening around the country and around the world, and he always keeps an eye on that as well. Stay tuned.